Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hey everybody, Q&A Kevin here, and I've got a hardware review for you today. And this is something pretty damn cool for me, because it's a first, because this is my first ever Amiga that I've owned. Being an Atari fan, as many people know, and specifically an ST owner back in the day, the Amoeba, as all the ST owners used to call it, was the competition. It was boo hiss and all that. But I do have somewhat of a relationship with this particular model, which I will go into shortly. But yeah, my first Amiga, it's an A12000, as you can see. No, an A1200. I always say A12000 for some reason, and I kept saying to myself before I started filming this video, don't call it an A12000, make sure you call it an A1200. And I still did it. So I've done it in so many videos, and I always feel so stupid after I've done it, because there's always someone who points it out in the comments. And even when I've put a pinned comment before saying I know I said A12000 when I should have said A1200, people still make a massive deal out of it, and I've never understood why people seem to get so upset about just making a small slip up like that. But yes, it is an A1200. This was a pickup from Marketplace, and you're going to be incredibly jealous when I tell you what I paid for it. I should first mention that I have tested it and it works perfectly, which is quite surprising, because I'd heard all sorts of horror stories about A1200s and about all the problems with them, and how a lot of the the second-hand ones you find and stuff don't work, and something to do with the leaky battery, I believe, is one of the things that causes them to fail. And yes, I've loaded it up, I've played games on it, it works perfectly. All the discs I got worked, I had no issues whatsoever, absolutely flawless in every way. Nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's also in really great condition, as you can see. But yes, I bought this with a big bundle of games, some of which I put in the picture. There was also a big bundle of Commodore 64 games with it, strangely. An Atari 65XE computer with a big bundle of games, and some other odd bits and pieces were in the box, like some Mega Drive joypads and a mouse and some manuals and all sorts of odd bits and pieces as well. Loads of instruction manuals for loads of games as well. And I paid for all of that £150. Yeah, yes. And I'm quite aware that these go for more than that on eBay on their own. So yeah, steal of the century there, picking that up. There was a very old gentleman who lives quite local to me, who had it all. It was his son's stuff, and he wanted it to go to a good home, and he didn't seem too worried about what I got for it. I offered him 150 and he accepted. So yeah, he was quite happy with that, and I was certainly very happy with that. So yeah, very, very good. So I mentioned that I had a personal story attached to actually this particular model, which I'll go into. I'll just lift it up a little bit so you can see it a bit more. There we go, very nice. And that's because my first ever proper job was working at Game in Hemel Hempstead in the Marlow Centre, which is still there. And we had, well, when I was working there was Christmas 1993 was when I was working there. And we had a A12000 on display set up that people could play games on. And at that point, it had been out a year. The A12000 originally, saying it again, A1200. I've got to get out of saying that. The A1200 had been out about a year, because it came out in 1992. It was selling fairly well, not amazing, but we were selling a lot of the games. I don't remember selling that many of the systems, but we were selling quite a lot of the games, along with the CD-32 as well. And yeah, so it was doing all right. And see, the Amiga CD32 was basically just the same thing, but it was just like a CD console version of the the A1200 computer, as I'm sure everybody knows, and it met a similar fate, which I'll go into. But yeah, so because it was set up to play, I used to actually spend quite a lot of time playing on it when the shop was quiet, because we had quite a few systems set up. We had a 3DO set up, we had a Mega Drive and Mega CD set up, Philips CDI, a SNES, and the Amiga. I think that was it. And I can remember sitting on it playing Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer and Lemmings games and all sorts of things. I remember sitting playing on that and having a lot of fun, because we had 2 joysticks as well, so we could play 2 player games and all that. Yeah, so I do have some actually really good memories of playing on the A1200 we had in the shop. Got it right that time. Yeah, so that's it really. So after all these years, it's kind of nice to actually have one of my own. And the only thing that never, the only reason I never got one before was mainly because the price always put me off, because they went for such silly money online. So let's have a look at the computer itself then. That's what we've got. So it's a big old beast, as you can see. Bloody big thing. In size, I think it's bigger than the original Amiga. I seem to remember it's longer. I don't think it goes back any further, but I'm pretty sure that it's longer. And similar design though, the same kind of off-white kind of colour with the beige keys. Similar kind of design concept. In fact, around the same time as this, anyone who knows the Amiga will know that they launched the A600, which was a kind of cost-reduced version of the original A500 Amigas that was cut down. It didn't have the keypad on stuff on it. It was really small little thing, and they introduced that as the kind of the budget model Amiga, and that had a very similar design as well. I mean, I'll stick a picture of it up in the right-hand corner so you can see what that one looked like. So let's have a look round and see what you have on this. So we'll go to that side first. We've got a disk drive, which to me looks like it's upside down. But yes, disk drive works perfectly. I've tried it. I've loaded quite a few games on disk. There's an expansion slot on that side there. On the back we have loads of ports. So we've got our power there. I've got the big old power pack there, which is actually massive but doesn't weigh anything, which I thought was really strange. That it was so light. It's so big but so light, which is quite strange. Oh, God, it's so heavy to hold up. So yeah, we've got our power socket, RF modulator, obviously if you're using with a normal TV, composite, I assume, a video port, left and right audio, parallel port, serial port, disk drive port, so an external disk drive on there as well if you want. And then it says 1 mouse, 2 game, which are your joystick and mouse ports. And then there's a little slot on the side, which I think is your trapdoor, if I remember rightly, for putting extra memory and stuff in that the original Amiga had. And then on the bottom there is another big door, which you can see there, and I believe that's where you put your hard drive if you want to fit an internal hard drive on this. This says serial number and all that, made in the UK, so it is one of the original Commodore models, as you can see, Commodore, and not one of the later ESCOM models, which I will go into in a little while. So there we go. Obviously, we've got a fairly decent keyboard. It's not amazing, but it's pretty decent. It's quite lightweight, but it's nice and springy. Quite nice to type on. And that's a look around the computer. Really, it did come with the mouse as well, a standard 2-button Atari socket type mouse. There we go. There's a Commodore mouse made in Malaysia. That came with it as well. I also got the full pack with workbench and Amiga extras, fonts, storage. There's a obligatory copy of Xcopy software in there, which I think everybody who owned an Amiga had. Certainly the couple of people I knew at school who had Amigas were avid users of Xcopy. I remember having a similar program for the ST. I think it was called A-Copy, actually, something like that. So there we go. So I've got that. I've got a user's guide here. I've got a workbench user's guide. And just to mention that, for those who might not know, is that the Amiga's operating system workbench came on disk. So it's quite alien to me, being an ST owner, where it was all built into the ROM. You just loaded it up and away you went. On the Amiga, you loaded it all from disk. But of course, the Amiga had the massive advantage of having a multitasking operating system, which could do a lot more than the ST one could. Although later on there were multitasking OS systems written for the ST, but that's a whole nother story altogether. The Amiga had it from day one, which was one of the advantages it had over the ST, aside from obviously having the better graphics chips and all that. So talking about better graphics chips and all that, so what advantages did the A12000 have over the original Amiga then? Well, 32-bit. So the original Amiga was a 16-bit computer using a multi-roller 68,000 CPU. This is a 32-bit, uses a multi-roller 68020 CPU, and a lot of people criticised having the use of an 020 because it was actually quite a limited first generation 32-bit processor, and a lot of people thought it should have used an 030 like the Atari Falcon, its rival, did, which offered more address space and lots of other advantages. And yeah, that was something that people were quite critical of. The second big upgrade from the original Amiga is in the graphics chip. So we now have the AGA graphics processor, and on paper it looks pretty damn good with 16.7 million colours. The standard you can show on screen is 256, but that can go up to over 250,000 when you're using the ham mode, which is an additional graphics chip you have in there, ham hold and modify, I believe it is. So you can use it as a trick, so you can basically display lots and lots more colours on the screen. The original Amiga had it, and the 12000 has a more advanced version of that benefits from having faster video memory and things like that. So yes, so when you look at that, that's pretty damn good. All those colours can be displayed on screen, but it wasn't as good as what was available on VGA PCs at the time. And the originally announced version of the Amiga 1200 was going to have something called the AAA chipset, and that was going to be much more powerful, and I believe it would have been able to do 3D graphics and stuff like that as well. And they missed out with this, and it only had the AGA. In fact, the CD32 had an extra chip, which I can't remember the name of right now. It's gone from my brain, which did help it do 3D graphics, which the 12000 didn't have. But there was literally only one game on the CD32 that used it. Guardian, I believe, was the only one that took advantage of it, which was a shame. It wasn't that powerful. It didn't mean it could do 3D as well as its rivals. Certainly not as well as say 3DO, Jaguar, even, and especially not the PlayStation and Saturn when they came along. So, but yeah, so it had advantages. The sound pooler system was exactly the same, I believe. Could be slightly wrong there, but yes, you still had your blitter chip, and you still had all the other advantages that the original Amiga had, and obviously it was backwards compatible, I believe, pretty much fully. I think there probably were some compatibility problems. I have to admit, I'm not 100% wised up on Amiga, because as I said, I've always been an Atari guy. So apologies if I did get anything wrong there, and feel free to correct me in the comments. But this is really sort of me getting excited about owning a 12000 rather than the view of a serious Amiga owner. So the games came on disc, 3.5-inch disc, the same as they did with, you know, Amigas before it. So there we go, it says Global Gladiators there. But another thing that was criticised for when we're talking about those discs is that it didn't use high density discs, which PCs at the time were using. It still used your standard floppy disk with, I think the maximum you could get on it was 800 and something K. So big mistake there, because the Falcon, again, its big rival, did offer high density disk drives, and the E12000 didn't. Sadly, there was a plan to launch a separate CD-ROM drive for the 12,000, which I've actually seen for myself, because they've got the prototype at the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester. I must stick that video back up on my channel. Maybe I'll stick it up the week after this one, actually, so people can see that, because it's pretty damn cool. I've put a photo up there in the corner anyway, so people can see it. But that would have basically meant that you could be used like a CD32 as well and play all CD32 games. But sadly, they never actually released that. I believe there is third-party, like, you know, CD-ROM add-ons, but the official Commodore one was never released, which is a shame. But again, the Falcon had actually quite a bit of software on CD, because it was compatible with several CD-ROM drives from day one. But whereas the Falcon failed in the market because unfortunately the American Atari, you know, Jack Tramiel decided that it would be left to Germany, Atari Germany, to market, and they wanted to market it as a business machine, a serious computer. And Commodore very much marketed the Amiga 12,000 as a games machine. I think had Atari UK got their hands on the Falcon and been able to do something with it, I think it would have done a lot better, because they would have marketed it as a games machine like they had done the ST before it. I know I've spoken with Daryl Still from Atari about that, and he always thinks it's sad that he wasn't allowed to take control of the Falcon. And I know that speaking to David Pleasance from Commodore, he said that, you know, when they saw the Falcon, they thought it was a pretty impressive machine and all that. When they heard it was going to be marketed as a business machine, they already knew that they'd beaten it, because they weren't going for that market. The Amiga always had been a games machine, and a lot of that obviously goes back to the fact that the Amiga was originally going to be a console, being developed for Atari. It was going to go into a console and then later a computer. But when Atari changed hands and the engineers flipped sides and ended up creating the Amiga for Commodore, it became a computer, because that's what Commodore wanted. So they wanted to do a computer. So yeah, that's why it had such an advanced chipset, very much designed for playing games. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to show here, really. I mean, as you see, I got quite a lot of quite a lot of games with this, which is pretty damn cool. So I've got some really good stuff like Lemmings 2, you know, getting Champ Manager 93 and Striker and Sensible Soccer. It's always good. Soccer Kid, Global Gladiators there. Of course, you cannot have an Amiga without Deluxe Paint. I've got Deluxe Paint 3 here with animation as well, so that's pretty cool. Got some other bits. Also got a whole disc box, which was full of magazine cover discs as well. There's about 50 or 60 of those, I think, in a box as well. And there's some other games. I've got like Nigel Mansell, Trolls, some other, trying to remember what else there is now, Strider. There's some normal Amiga games and some 12,000 specific games in there. But all in all, pretty happy with my lot there. It was very, very bargainous to get. I usually do a bit at the end of my videos where I say, whether a computer is worth owning or not in the present day. It's a bit difficult to do with this one, because I'm Now, I wasn't an Amiga owner back in the day. I've not had a lot of experience with this Amiga because I've only had it a couple of weeks. I've played on it and I certainly had a lot of fun with it. Although I am very familiar with the Amiga, obviously from friends having them when I was younger, and from playing them a lot at retro events and stuff as well. And also, I did recently do some ebooks on the Amiga as well, because it was a system I wanted to find out more about and play more of the games. Especially seeing, interesting to see how they compared to the SD versions that I grew up playing. So I did download an Amiga emulator onto the computer and sit and play through loads and loads and loads of Amiga games, and had a great deal of fun with it. And I've also got a Raspberry Pi which has got an Amiga emulator on it as well. And so the Amiga is actually a system that I have actually started playing games on probably over the last couple of years, where I hadn't really played on it that much previously. And it's definitely a superior machine to the ST for games, as much as I hate to say it. Although the ST was better at 3D. I have to get that in there because of the faster CPU. The 12,000 is a really nice machine. The sound obviously is fantastic. Some of the games are really visually impressive, but it was never going to match the consoles of the time, unfortunately. A lot of the games didn't really match the quality of what was on the Mega Drive and the SNES, let alone once the next generation machines came along. And unfortunately, that was one of the big things that cost Commodore. And Commodore went bust, sold the rights to the Amiga to ESCOM, and ESCOM then marketed their own ESCOM A1200, which actually had compatibility problems with the original Amiga 1200 because they used a different type of disk drive. And it was also a lot more expensive, £150 more expensive, I read online, which is quite ridiculous. So that didn't do very well at all, and it wasn't long before they disappeared as well. It's believed less than 1 million A1200s were sold in Europe, and it always seems like it would have been more than that to me, because as I say, I remember it being quite popular, but I think that was a UK thing more than it probably sold better in the UK and possibly Germany than anywhere. Yeah, it's a shame really what ended up happening to Commodore and Atari, because both great names from my childhood. But it was Commodore's last throw of the dice, and unfortunately it was never going to compete with PCs of the time as a serious computer. PCs were very much taken over at that point, especially once games like Doom came along, because people started taking the PC seriously as a games machine then as well. And then the quality of the stuff that was coming out on consoles, on the Mega Drive and SNES, you couldn't get anything, likes of Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario World on the Amiga. Nothing that good, and still having a one-button joystick didn't help it. And then, once the sort of the next generation came along, the Saturn and PlayStation, no one was going to look at an Amiga for playing games. It was a PC, or a PC or a PlayStation, I suppose, And it's a sad story, that nothing more came, and a lot of the things that they planned for the A1200, never came to fruition, like the CD-ROM drive and stuff. And the CD32 went the same way, selling even lower numbers, and Commodore went bust before they could even launch the CD32 in North America, which was a shame. Very sad story indeed. And I think that's one reason why there is still so many Amiga fans, and they're still so passionate about the machines to this day, because they feel that almost a little hard done by how it all ended, and they really want to keep that brand alive, and that the Amiga was very ahead of its time. And and you can get all sorts of expansions now for these Amigas, vampire boards and such, like accelerators, that people have you can use their A1200 to surf the internet and stuff like that with use of these accelerator boards and broadband adapters and things like that. And it's pretty amazing all the things that that people have done. So, you know, if you want a computer where it's got a massive community that, and you're really into things like hardware mods and stuff, then the Amiga is a great computer to buy. I mean, because the community around it and all the mods and stuff that are available, you know, it would keep the most avid hobbyist happy. If you want something just to play games on, then maybe it's not such a great solution. Although, you know, you can still play all the original Amiga games on it. You can get flash drive solutions for that as well. And, you know, there were a hell of a lot of classic games on the Amiga. So yeah, I think, you know, if you're really into your retro gaming, then you probably should have an Amiga in your collection. You know, it was probably the most notable omission from mine until I picked this up. But anyway, I thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed my look at the Amiga A1200. Get it right again, try. And I'll see you again for another video very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.